We are out of executive session. It is 4:33 p.m. and no actions were taken in executive session. So next on the agenda is nominating committee. So I put in the chat earlier the section from our bylaws that discuss what the bylaws say about a nominating committee, which says that nominating committee consisting of 3 voting members of the governing board should be recommended by the executive committee at its February meetings, of which we are in our second one, and shall be elected at the March meeting of the governing board. And this nominating committee is going to be nominating elective officers and at-large members of the executive committee. So
if I can jump in, when I drafted this, or basically plagiarized it from Addison County Regional Planning Commission's language on nominating committee, you know, I did it for a good place to start, and we ended up passing it. And the one thing that is a little bit different is that the executive committee does not have term limits. So there's a lot more turnover on the ACRPC board because you're only there for so many years and then you term off. But I don't think that's really a problem. You know, we still, much like we were talking about with the finance committee, we want to be able to have the governing board either appoint or reaffirm or whatever you want to call it. So I think it's fine that this works, even though I hadn't been considering that when stealing this. So I think we can, and the fact that we can have the nominating committee can be eligible for any of those offices. You know, I think it's fine if we say, okay, there are 3 of us here who are willing to serve as the nominating committee, bearing in mind that we can also get somebody who volunteers from the floor at the next governing board meeting and then elect them. And then those 3 people, whether it's 3 of us or 2 of us and 1 governing board member, whatever that makeup is, they then can figure out, you know, the first thing they would do is come to each of the sitting incumbent executive board members and say, do you want to continue in your role? And then they'll have a slate of officers for the April governing board meeting. So I think it's should be pretty easy. I'm happy to serve on the nominating committee.
well, that's 1. It might be interesting to have a member of the nominating committee who's not a sitting member of the executive committee, just to make sure that we have the appearance and the reality of it not being an inside club kind of thing.
Absolutely. It would be preferred. You know, we'd have to reach out to somebody before we get to the governing board meeting.
One of the things I'm thinking about, I'm not thinking very clearly, but does this, if it works for the Regional Planning Commission in terms of timing, it probably works for us. I'm just thinking about by when we get appointments for the governing board each year from the select boards. Does that, Adam, does this timing work that way? I mean, I remember it's kind of like pulling teeth a little bit, but.
Our annual meeting is in May. So basically, if executive board creates the nominating slate of officers for the nominating committee at February, at March, they're appointed or elected. They make their decision. They announce it by the April meeting of their slate of officers for the board. And then at the May meeting, the slate of officers, there are challenges from the floor if they want to be, but the slate of officers are elected in May. So that's how it works for us. Your meeting schedule is a little bit different. but I don't remember it as well. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm looking now.
Yeah, our annual meeting is also in May. But I think, I mean, Nancy's question is if the towns are only appointing people in April, it is kind of weird that our bylaws say that we're going to be electing officers in May, because it may be that some town is late to appoint someone, and then we have a situation where the town hasn't appointed someone that we want to. But, you know, it could always be that they're elected contingent upon the town
Yeah. And
doing it necessary, right? I mean, it's like in actual fact, and as you said, like we have people that are appointed year after year after year, so there's not actually that much drama.
yeah, and for ACRPC, delegates aren't appointed usually until, well, I mean, their appointment becomes active with the new fiscal year. So we could run into the same situation there, where somebody is elected, but then they're not they're not appointed by their select board. It's pragmatically, it's not a big issue.
Yeah, I can't remember it happening in 25 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the key decision here is if the bylaws say we need 3 people for a nominating committee, Shannon has put his hand up. And so the executive committee needs to pick out 2 more names out of a hat, at least one of which would ideally not be a current sitting member of the executive committee.
Or even, you know, people that might be likely suspects that we can wrangle between now and March 11th.
Somebody has to be wrangling. We need a wrangler.
Well, as the one person who raised their hand thus far, I'm happy to lead that charge. But if you have suggestions, either now or offline, let me know, and then I can happily wrangle.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Oops. I guess we can move on to the next item in the agenda then. Is there any further discussion on this one? Okay. Seems like there is. Okay. So now section 9, updates on the audit. So I gave an update earlier in the executive director report talking about where I am. Lynn, do you want to give an update or feedback from your perspective as to where you think we are? Any further detail?
Sure. So I think, you know, at this point, we need to hear from Bonnie about what you sent. So my hope, Ellie, is if we haven't heard anything from her by tomorrow, if you can just check in and see, did you get my email? I think we have to keep the pressure on because she's pretty vague about when she'd get around to it.
Mhm.
And meanwhile, we actually need to get going on 2024 as well.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I have concerns about keeping it moving because she needs to look at 23 after she looks at 22. So I think that's all I have to say is that we're already looking at, you know, the audit for 24, and that can't happen until she wraps up 23, and hopefully she can step right into doing the, you know, the audit work for 24, the testing and whatnot. And that, you know, in terms of the capitalization, that 24 is clean and, that, you know, we understand what it is she's looking for, et cetera. And that maybe wrapping up 24 is going to happen a lot quicker.
One would hope. But yes, I share your concerns, Lynn, because we can obviously I can control what I'm doing, and Darlene has been really quite responsive in all this, but we can't control the responsiveness of our auditor. So I do agree that we need to. I will reach out to her tomorrow if I haven't heard, and then maybe you can take the next turn if she doesn't get back to me by end of week.
Yeah, listen, I'm happy to press a little bit here because, you know, this is kind of an issue in terms of reporting to the state. So anyway, if you want to copy me when you reach out to her tomorrow,
Yep.
Tomorrow's Thursday. If we don't hear from her by Monday, I may call her.
Yep. That sounds like a plan.
Okay. So that's all I have to add. And Ellie, you've done just a ton of work for her. I mean, I think it's great. It needed to happen. And thank you for all that. That spreadsheet is something else.
Well, it's nearly done now for 23 as well. So I'm glad I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and there'll be space to do other things that have been not getting the attention that they really deserve. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay.
Jeff,
Thank
you had something you wanted to say?
I had a question. I appreciate you raising the specter of the 24 audit. Is the assumption that we're working with the same firm?
That was something I was wondering about, just historically, if somebody can tell me how Bonnie was chosen. Was there an RFP sent out? I mean, and often with organizations, I don't know, every 3 to 5 years, an RFP will go out.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I don't need to hear the history here, but if it's brief and somebody can give it, that would be helpful. And I'm also wondering, I think it's a good thing to send RFPs from time to time. And I don't know if there are other auditors who do this work, in this sector. I'm curious about who the other CUDs are and who they use for an auditor.
I can find out who they use for an auditor. We did, if memory serves, we put out an RFP a number of years back. We got 2 responses. I think there was Bonnie, and then there was the firm that did EC Fiber's audit. And Sai, you could, I believe Bonnie, yeah, I believe Bonnie was it was a better price. And then there was also, I think she was also auditing another CUD at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe DV Fiber. I don't know, but I can find out who everyone's using now. I know Barry Dunn is probably more on the expensive side, but they've been our accounting consultants as part of the BEAD subrecipient capacity grants, and they do. I mean, they're like they're the big behemoth of telecoms accounting in New England.
Okay.
So I'm sure they do a great job, but we would also pay for it.
But to your point, Lynn, I think and Ellie and I actually, it was one of those really short, fast conversations saying we really should, we've been 3 years, we should send out another RFP just to keep all of us honest.
Yeah,
Great.
and I think, what it costs is important, but also how quickly people can turn it around
Mhm.
is just, I think in some ways is just as important. And again, I feel like I don't understand the budget enough to know what can the budget bear in terms of audit costs. And I know we haven't paid Bonnie yet for the work for 23, so I don't have a sense of what that.
We've paid her for half of it for 23.
Yeah, there's more like a third of it, but yeah,
Maybe it
we
was a
paid her
third,
for some of
yeah.
it, and then I mean our budget for this year is actually under because we anticipated paying. So we budgeted for what we thought this year's budget or this year's audit would be, and not for paying last year's audit as well. So
Yeah.
we're already over budget, but I mean that's fine. And I think your point is well made, Lynn. I mean, it's unless the price is significantly higher, timeliness, quality of feedback are important considerations as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're in a better
So-
place now to make that fine distinction, whereas first time out, we absolutely weren't and we had no money. So it was important.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it great that we're talking about forming a finance committee that can do the heavy lifting on the RFP adjudication, so I won't have to.
Exactly.
As what Steve was going to say, because I'm
Great.
full up right now.
One other question about 24, and that is internal financial statements as of 12/31. Have those been produced?
We have the 12/31/24 P&L and the balance sheet.
Mhm.
I don't know if, what type of adjustments need to take place on that, or what adjustments took place
Right.
in 2024. And, before that goes Bonnie, if it's, I guess it's going to Bonnie at this point. Maybe we're doing the RFP for 2025. But I didn't do any of the work on 2024.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we need to reverse if there were adjustments done. So I think, Sai, I hate to put you on the, in the limelight here, but I don't know like what needs to be done to like wrap it up, to hand it off to Bonnie.
Well, and to be honest with you, I think some of it will depend on tidying up and finishing out with Bonnie, at least understanding all of the reporting and all of that, and that will define to a certain extent what the last journal entries for 24 will have to be, would be my guess. I mean, I'm not, the brightest button in the box here.
Let me clarify. I understand that we wouldn't begin the audit process for 24 until we've closed 23, and you have to make a series of adjustments that would then flow through. My question was more simply, internal financials, unaudited, understanding that they're subject to adjustments because of this capitalization process. It would be good for the executive committee to see 12/31/24 internal financials.
Yeah.
So with however many caveats as necessary, if we could do that, we're going into March, and I feel a fiduciary responsibility to raise that.
Yeah. And we can send that before the next executive committee meeting.
Great, thank you.
And for everybody to know, it's sort of draft.
Yep, understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I will make a note to put that on the agenda for the next executive committee meeting. And Lynn, will you be sending those out, or would you like me to do it?
You know what? I'll pull the reports and send them to you to send out.
Okay, great. So is there anything else on Steve?
Just a bit of context to remind you that Maple Broadband is a very lean operation. There's a couple of people who are putting a lot of hours into it, and there's a lot of work to do. And right now, with BEAD breathing down our neck, that kind of has to, by necessity, be a major focus of what's going on. I hate to burden Ellie down to doing an RFP for an auditing firm as much as it might be appropriate. Either we just say, we're going to have to tolerate what we have right now, and we will absolutely agree as an executive committee, we're going to do this kind of an RFP a year from now, come hell or high water. I don't know. I'm really worried about the workload that we're facing, and we're going to continue to face, especially this year.
So I think the RFP, if we didn't RFP, it would be for 2025.
For 20, yeah.
And not for 2024.
Okay. And then the other thing that was offered, and I think it's absolutely desirable, is if we can get the finance committee sorted out, there's no real reason that Ellie would really need to have her hands in that too much. She would be participating in the committee, but other members of the committee, I'm guessing, could just, pick up the last one we did, tweak it as appropriate, issue it to wherever we can, and then move on with other business.
Yep.
One of the things that I think I recall from the last time we did this is a small state. We wanted to keep it in state. And so I think the greatest difficulty, as I recall, we were running into is there's just not that many auditing firms that would specialize in the kind of business we're engaged in.
But asking the other CUDs who they're using will be useful information.
Yep, who they're using and if they're happy.
Yep.
Yeah, we were way more educated now than we were then.
Yeah, and so were the other CUDs as well. We've all been through this ringer a couple of times. Okay, we've got 7 minutes left in our meeting, and I think we really only have one more topic because there's a lot of, unless anyone has other business to raise. The last topic is the VCB revolving loan discussion update. And so the update on that is that, trying to think of how to put this. The VCUDA and the VCB are on the same page that it does not make sense to take any firm action until there's clarity around what's happening or not happening with the BEAD program. But in the meantime, we are working, so VCUDA and VCBB are both working with the VCBB's financial consultant to design what this program would look like, how it would be administered, how the governance would work. So we had, I think it was last week, Friday or Thursday, we had a call on that subject, and I think it was a very productive call because we started back at first principles of what we're trying to achieve and simplicity. And so where it stands now is the financial consultants are off essentially drafting some framework conceptual documents for further discussion based on our original discussion. And then we're also just talking about what the actual next steps would be, because the idea is to have something ready to pull the trigger if it is determined that the trigger should be pulled. So that's the update. Any questions? Okay. Nancy's put in the chat about governing board appointments. Okay. All right. So does anyone have any other business to raise? Okay. Well, hearing none, our next meeting is next week, Wednesday, March 5th. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Right. Thank you, guys. Have a great evening and speak to you soon.
Bye.
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 Hello.